All right, folks, now we have a terrific panel, the rapidly evolving role of the Chief Data and Analytics Officer. And we're going to talk about the demand for data and AI leadership is growing as organizations confront the opportunities and challenges represented by Gen AI. We were just talking about this. Our distinguished panel will discuss the rapidly evolving demands of the CDA role and how they work to ensure that their orgs are well prepared for the next stages of data and AI representation. Our moderator is Randy Bean, Innovation Fellow at Wavestone. Randy, would you come up, please? We're also going to be joined by Linda Avery, former Chief Data and Analytics Officer and SVP at Verizon. Raj Nimmagadda is here, Chief Data Officer, R&D, Data and Data Services at Sanofi. And the aforementioned Sol Rashidi is here, former Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Estee Lauder, Merck, Sony Music, Royal Caribbean. And Sravan Kasarla is here, Chief Data Officer at Thrivent. Please welcome them all.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. And I had a knee surgery a couple weeks ago, a knee replacement, so that's my prop. Delighted to be here today. Thank you very much, Dave Matheson, the CDAO Club. Very excited to have a great panel here today. It's always the panel that makes the program. For those who don't know me, my name's Randy Bean. I do a lot of writing on data and analytics, write for Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Review, and Forbes. I wrote a book during COVID, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data, and AI. And other thing that do is have been conducting a survey of chief data officers and data leaders for the past 12 years, and we'll share some of the findings of that survey. It was just completed last week and will be published the first week in January. 90% of the participants are chief data officers from Fortune 1000 companies and leading organizations. So by way of introduction, I would like to have each of the panelists familiarize you with who they are, their backgrounds as chief data officers, and maybe a little bit of what they're doing currently or most recently. And maybe we'll start at the far end so we can work way this way.
Sure. So Linda Avery, and I have been a chief data officer an analytics officer for almost 9 years. Officially, I was the inaugural chief data and analytics officer at Verizon. Prior to that, I was the first chief data officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And prior to that, I had a career 20 years at Goldman Sachs, managing director in technology. And much of what I did was actually focusing on data. But at that point, the title of chief data officer was not a very common title. We're going back to 2013 and before. And so I could probably say that I've been a chief data officer for even longer than 9 years. And man, do I have stories to tell.
Hi everyone, I'm Raj Nimmagadda. I'm Raj Nimmagadda. I'm a functional CDO for Sanofi R&D. I lead R&D data groups, data strategy, data management, and data governance. So before Sanofi, I was with Novartis, and past 20 years of my career is in pharma, leading data and business and digital transformation. So glad to be here.
Great. Nice to see you again. Sravan.
Hi, I'm Sravan Kasarla, Chief Data Officer at Thrivent. Thrivent is a financial services company, purpose-driven a company offering financial advice. I've been in the financial services industry for about 15 years now, close to 15 years. My roles have been predominantly, out of my 30 years of experience, about 22 years have been in the data leadership roles. Yeah, I wouldn't say how long the CDOs, about 5 years at Thrivent as an official CDO or inaugural CDO. And prior to that, I was at Fidelity Investments, leading data for one of the business units. And that's where I think I would say most of my experience and the knowledge around the data and the power of machine learning and data science started at. So I would love to be really talking to everybody, and honored to be in the middle of distinguished panelists.
Great. And you're a great client. Saul?
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I think as they mentioned, I've got a lot of formers behind my names. I'm a recovering C-suite executive. As of May, I said no mas, I'm done, I need a break. What was supposed to be a sabbatical to rest and restore has turned into something super amazing. I was the former chief data officer, chief data and analytics officer, chief analytics officer, and at Royal Caribbean, I was their chief data and AI officer. I don't know if you guys remember post-Watson, but after 2014, AI had a negative connotation to it, and cognitive computing was the name. And I remember going back and forth in my offer letter if it was going to be chief data and cognitive officer or if it was chief data and AI officer. We did land on AI, even though Watson was still struggling to rebrand itself. But I always say, don't go by titles given in LinkedIn, validate through offer letters. That's a completely different beast. I've had some great teams. We have about 8 patents granted across a variety of industries. Everything kind of started at IBM. Big shout out to Kelly Mans, who's there. She and I, back in 2008, 9, and 10, we were the data and analytics SAP ERP gurus. I was an MDM specialist of all things. Nothing teaches you data like being a data lead on 7 global ERP deployments. If I see another Mara Mark table again, I am going to, my PTSD is going to kick in. But I think it's an exciting space. The pace of change is the slowest it's ever going to be. I decided to get out of corporate America because I experienced a level of fatigue with more alignment discussions and more alignment discussions and more alignment discussions, which is why I think the qualifications list for that CAIO list was very conflicting. You want 15 plus years of academic experience, but if you've been in academia, you haven't presented to the board. You're not managing politics. You're not maneuvering and weaving between everyone else's agenda and having your agenda sort of try and find a seat at the table. You've developed your IQ, but the EQ is a completely different ballgame within our space and field, and I think people fail to mention that. So it'll be interesting to see who they end up finding and how that EQ and BQ balances out the IQ.
But I really want to second what you're just saying here, because I think the EQ element is something that does not get the focus that it needs, and it's so,
it doesn't.
so
But it's
critical.
probably the biggest pain point. It's never about the technology. We know what to do. It's convincing everyone else.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about a little bit about where we are with the Chief Data, CDO, and CDAO role. 2023, from my perspective, has been a year of significant change. From the beginning of this year, almost week 1, when I got a call from Linda saying that she was leaving her job at Verizon, hardly a week's passed where I haven't gotten a call from a chief data officer who has just left their job or who is thinking about leaving their job. And it's literally from A to V, Albertsons, Verizon's, State Farm, Eli Lilly, Levi's. I could go, Citizens Bank, I could go on and on down the list. From the survey, a little bit of data. In 2012, only 12% of organizations had somebody appointed to the CDO, CDAO role. But by this year, it was 83.2%. So the role has clearly become ubiquitous. But over the past several years, we've also asked whether the role is successful and established within organizations. Actually, this year it improved. Last year, only 1 in 3 said that the role was successful and well established. This year, it was 51%. So I guess the good news is that an improvement. The bad news is that 49%, roughly half, still say that they're struggling with the role. And we also asked whether the role is well understood within your organization. Last year, it was 2 in 5, so 40%, and this year it's 48.6%. So there's some improvement, but still a lot of work to be done. So maybe I could ask each of you, starting with Saul, how have you seen the CDAO role evolve over the past 5 to 10 years?
So data is something that everyone and no one owns. And my running joke with my team is, when's the last time you flushed your toilet and called your plumber and said thank you? You just don't. When's the last time you flipped a switch and called the electrician and said thank you? You just don't. So our positions fundamentally are meant that when there's an issue, that's why we exist. There is no good day. So we're constantly firefighting. The role has evolved, though, because at first it used to be a bit of a battle of the CIO and CDO. And what's the division of labor, and where does one start and end, and where does the other pick up and go? But now you've got the CTO, the Chief Digital Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Data Officer, Chief Analytics Officer, now the Chief AI Officer. All of us fundamentally with accountability and responsibility for data. where are the divisions of labor? What are the rules of engagements? And unfortunately, I think with the evolution, I know 3 companies that have done this really well, but I know hundreds that have not. The C-suite is not familiar with our space, so they just don't understand the intricacies and all the different components and how they weave in together. And so they're not stepping forward and calling out the division of labor. They're kind of leaving it for us to figure out. Well, you get hired, you're optimistic, you drank the Kool-Aid the first 6 months, and then the realities kick in. So I think it's great that the role has actually improved in stats, because it was 1 of 3, and that's a really dismal statistic to be in. Because you're working so hard to get things done and pushing the needle, and to find out that your efficacy just, is barely cutting it. It's hard, because most CDOs don't last. And I always say you need a backbone and not a wishbone in the position. But I think the evolution has led to, it's gotten a bit more convoluted and diluted, because there's just too many CXOs. And we're not outlining the division of labor, the accountability, and the responsibilities. So the metrics to prove productivity and efficacy has gotten really hard. I think the other intangible aspect of it, everyone wants ROI, but I've always said that ROI comes in 3 forms, not necessarily monetary ROI, but there's a cultural ROI and there's a relevancy ROI. I can't tell you that we're going to save 37% yet. And I can't tell you that our uplift in marketing and revenue is going to be 22% because of this digital campaign. But I can tell you, if we don't start now, we will slowly become irrelevant in the next 2 to 3 years. And so there's a relevancy ROI that we don't take into consideration. And those are the nuances that, unless you've had the role, you've got the scraped knees, you've got the bruised elbows, I don't think you'd be privy to.
Can I ask you a follow-on question on that, Saul? Sure. So do you think that the CDO role, because now there's an industry around that, there's all of these events, do you think the CDO role is actually needed, or is something needed that just does those type of things, but it can be called any number of things?
Well, we have a lot of conferences and stuff, because I think misery loves company. So I think we're all a band of brothers and sisters that like to come together, and it just feels good knowing others are going about it. I think there is a fundamental need for a CDO, but I think other leaders have to step up. Before you bring a CDO in place, understand what they're going to do, create divisions of labor, and clearly articulate that in the interview process to see, and I always split the role up. You're either back office, so defensive playbook, or your front office, offensive playbook. In my ideal role, end-to-end ecosystems, platforms, products, and business value-oriented capabilities. But now I won't even say yes to the role unless it's end-to-end, because strategy without proper execution is basic hallucination. So if I have to hand a functional spec, if I have to hand a technical spec, if I have to hand a requirements document to an IT team that's already just managing another third party that's doing the development, it's a no-go. So I think it should exist. I think other executives need to step up and clear the lines. And I think the role can't be sliced and diced the way it is right now, unless you're personally okay with it. But it does have an impact on what you're able to produce.
So I'd love to hear whether others feel the same way, because I did a panel in Boston a few months ago and asked whether AI should be part of the CDAO role. And the first CDO said absolutely, and the second CDO said absolutely not. So I'd like to see if you're all on the same page, or if you have divergent views on this. Should the role exist?
About the CDO role or CAIO role?
The CDO, CDAO role.
Yeah.
This is alphabet soup, isn't it?
I think, Randy, role definitely need to exist. But going with Saul about how the role evolved, right? I think that has the answer for that one. It started as a risk function. It started as a more privacy function, and it's more started as a access control function, to the point that you had no responsibility of data, but you called chief data officer, but all you're doing is controlling it. From there, it became decision support. A little bit about decision support, because you're sitting in the business and you have a little bit of responsibility to ensure enterprise metrics are created, you have the right quality of the data. So the data quality and a little bit of metadata management got added. From there to more to the engineering responsibilities expanded, now to more of a business outcomes. Again, I think there is a positive life cycle, or you can say that a bit of a hockey stick, but it did become hockey stick when generative AI got released just a year ago, that the heightened expectations. What is different? The expectations have been different, role expanded, But to Saul's point and your survey saying about is, the role is still not understood. This is still a very new C-suite executive whose role is not fully understood. Everybody is excited to have a CDO or CDAO or CAIO. Good luck to the new CAIOs that are coming into the role. The expectations are high and unrealistic, and also not supported by the roles to make it successful. I think that's what I see as a big difference.
You know, about 6 weeks ago, I was here at Northeastern at the Institute, and I was part of a panel where we discussed the relationship of the board to this role. And it was astonishing to me to learn via a Deloitte survey how rarely AI and data actually end up on the board agenda. And how few chief data and analytics officers, I'm going to just use that label here, are actually members of boards. And I think this is a huge gap, because without this level of participation and without the level of accountability that the C-suite must have, it's very difficult to have success in this kind of role. Now, I think, you know, with the prevalence of the emergence of Gen AI, which is something that has been a very tangible form of AI, there is more curiosity than there has been. But I do continue to see this as an egregious gap in terms of the governance of organizations, that you don't see these topics on agendas, and you don't even see chief data and analytics officers necessarily presenting to the boards with any real frequency. Without that, I think that it's, you know, it's an interesting role, but in many cases it is an empty role. So,
Linda, if I may disagree with you for just a quick
Absolutely.
point. I think it's getting on the board's agenda. The challenge is there is no seat at the table. Somebody else is representing. Whether CDO is reporting to a chief digital and technology officer, or a business leader, or to a CFO, or a risk leader, but they're not able to really articulate and represent. I see that to be a challenge. And that's why, I mean, boardrooms have been talking, everybody's talking about generative AI. Why are we not able to do the coolest thing that what we are hearing outside? I think it's on the agenda, but not in the right way, and nobody is really representing
respectfully, Deloitte would disagree. They actually interviewed 100 different boards and counted how many times you're on the agenda. It was abysmally small.
Maybe if
So.
I can add.
Yes.
CEOs, everyone is talking now about how they want to use AI and how they want to transform all their businesses. Like, they want to be AI-first companies. Like, I can talk about Sanofi. But you want to be AI-first company, you have to manage your data well, right? Do you have the right foundations? Do you have your right governance in place so that you can use it broadly, not just for the use case you are collecting the data for? So I think it's as a CDOs, we have more work to do educating the senior leadership on why you have to be a data first. I think people always tend to go into these fancy stuff, building nice algorithms, but you have these nice algorithms, but on how much data are you able to train this on, right? Were you able to use all the data that you have on that model? Right? I think those examples has to be given to the senior level leaders so that we can be focusing more on the data foundations, and we can leverage the data that organizations have. The point Sol made is very important. The alignments, right? How much alignments you have to make. I think alignment after alignment, explaining why data is important. Why you need to build foundations, why you need to derive value short term while you are building your long term plan. Building this digital and data strategy in alignment with business strategy. I think all this has to be very crucial, and the senior C-suite has to understand and prioritize all this.
If I may bridge the conversation, the topic has not been discussed at the board of directors until 2023. This is an anomaly year for us. Prior to that, I've presented to the board of directors because I never took a role unless I knew, do I have a seat at the table or not?
Yeah.
And I'd always report into the business. That was like mandatory. But you still get duped a little bit. They sell you the Ferrari and you're lucky you get a Honda Civic when you go in terms of resources and headcount and how hungry they really are. But now I think the biggest marker of how the role has evolved is I ask a few questions. Whether you want to be AI-driven or data-driven. When I meet the CHRO, I go, do you guys have a pension fund? And what's the average tenureship of your employees? They have absolutely no idea how that relates back to my role. Well, if you're in a company, in an industry, where there's a pension, people don't leave. You've got folks who've been there 20, 30 plus years. They've been doing the same function and the same job, maybe changed a few roles, but different shades of gray. They have not changed. You cannot be data-centric or AI-centric if your fundamental working staff has been there 15, 20, 25 plus years. That is moving the Titanic before it hits the glacier, and we all kind of know how that story went. So for me, those are key little indicators of, okay, you want to be data-centric, but are you going to put that all on the shoulders of a CDO? Because that sounds like a bigger cultural issue. That's not something the CDO can push. That's pushing water up a hill, not even a boulder. I can push multiple boulders up a hill. I can't push a figment of your imagination up a hill and call it effective. So you get smarter at asking the questions, but then unfortunately you get the reality of companies love buzzwords on PowerPoints. We do a great job in presenting what our 2-3-year outlook is going to be. In next year's board of directors meeting, when you get invited, watch how many of them report on the progress from last year's board of directors goals and strategic initiatives. They don't. Every year it starts new. And so those are key indicators of where the role has evolved. And I don't think, unfortunately, it's a topic of conversation, but it's still incremental movement, not exponential movement.
So, go ahead.
It's been also interesting to see how influential the consultancies have been in this space. You mentioned, I guess essentially deckware, and how heavy deckware is in our space. And that basically leaves it to us to manage expectations. And those expectations can be pretty darn hard to manage because they're, as you were saying, you've been given a Honda Civic to drive, and they think they've given you a Ferrari. And so one of the most important, I think, factors in being successful in these roles is being great at communication. And I can't tell you how important continuous communication is in this seat, because without it, people are going to assume the worst, that things aren't happening. And so, again, I found the job description fascinating. Again, such a focus on academia, alignment, communication. These are the things that actually will drive the success far more than any of the technology.
I think, Linda, you're right on. Just the way that in the technology side, we call about continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD. I think there is a continuous delivery, continuous campaigning in the data and AI officers.
Just as an aside, since you raised the board topic, on November 1st, I was invited, it was just kind of out of the blue, but I was invited to join a panel for the National Association of Corporate Directors, board directors in New York, with Ash Gupta, the former president of American Express, and Heidi Landford, the former chief data officer at the Fitch Group. And it was to talk to them about generative AI and what boards should know about generative AI. I don't consider myself an expert at all, but I did have the opportunity to go to the Wall Street Journal Tech Live event 2 weeks before that, where Sam Altman was the keynote speaker. So my head was filled with all of the stuff that I could share with the audience. But the directors, the board directors, for the most part, were at zero. It was what you'd read in the newspaper or what you'd see in 60 Minutes in terms of their level of knowledge and practical experience. A little bit more data. We ask each year, who has primary responsibility for data and analytics? 5 years ago, 48.1% said it was the CDO. This year, that jumped to 66.4%. So majority seems to be now that it's with the CDO, but to your point, a third of people are still saying it's very dispersed across the organization.
Is that based off of CMO, CRO, CEO, like your classic, your upper level C-suite? Who was the audience for the survey?
90% of the respondents were CDOs, so there is a built-in bias there.
There is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Wishful thinking.
Always ask context behind
You're
believing a
exactly
number.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
And just a couple other pieces of data.
Sure.
Asked about whether the primary focus was offense and defense. It improved this year from 54% saying that their focus was offense to 62%. But in financial services and banking in particular, I know many CDOs that after the Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank, they were pulled back into all of the regulatory work. And in terms of analytics being part of the CDO function this year, it was 70.8%, which was a record high. Let me ask you a little bit about generative AI. I just happened to see something yesterday. Maybe some of you know Julie Bardmesser, who was a former chief data officer equivalent with Voya, and before that with Deutsche Bank and Citigroup. And she sent this note, and I thought it was relevant, or she posted it on LinkedIn. It says, I've been speaking at data and AI conferences across the country, and almost every CDO I meet shares just that. We are stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the rock is AI. Since ChatGPT burst onto the scene, AI became a boardroom topic, front page news, and every conference keynote. In response, a lot of chief data officers are rebranding themselves as chief AI officers, and lofty promises are being made on the exponential value that can be delivered with AI. So I'd love to get your reaction to that, because it seems just spot on in terms of the discussion over the next 2 days.
So when Watson launched, we had an application layer, but it was natural language processing sitting on a big data ecosystem. The word generative hadn't been created yet. But the capability is not technically new. It's been around a really, really long time. The primary difference is the channel strategy, because for anyone to touch AI-based capabilities, it was predominantly B2B until November of 22. But it's not new, it's not groundbreaking, it's just now it's been democratized, and then the speed of development based on the APIs that are now available, I think is what's catapulted us into a whole new space. I've had the opportunity to help a few Fortune 10s now with their AI strategy. And with much respect to my brothers and sisters at McKinsey and Bain and BCG and Accenture and everyone, respect them fully. I don't agree with their approach. I just don't, because they develop an AI strategy in a vacuum, because they don't have to worry about the delivery and the execution and the investments and the justification of the cost and the benefit. I just helped a company right now. They spent $2 million on just fundamental computational workloads, and they got $600,000 in revenue. ROI there, not so positive. But unless you've actually had the scraped knees, it's really difficult to assess and quantify and know how to approach the AI strategy.
Right.
So I think generative's amazing. I think the number one use case should be 100% internal productivity based because of the inaccuracies. If you push something external, you've got to be okay with that standard differential of up to 20% of inaccuracy, which by the way is still better than human error. But you have to have that risk tolerance. Most companies with a strong P&L don't have that risk tolerance. So I think there's a ton of opportunity for it to be productivity based. There's that. But even with internal selling, I think you have to set up the expectations. And I always say, don't ever develop an AI strategy in a vacuum. I actually asked to see their data strategy first, because someone had said this earlier. I do fundamentally feel AI is a product of data. Now, it's its own ecosystem, and it does require a different set of funding requirements, talent, planning, budgeting, and then picking the use cases. But you pick the use cases based on the data ecosystem that you have in place that's in a solid state. Not all data is created equal. I've divided it up into 3 tiers, and you have to not only look at your data strategy, but even with the use cases you choose, I have a feasibility index that I use. It's data, infrastructure, and talent. And there's a series of questions. And if you're not at your MVP of having those 3 things, likely that's not going to be a use case you're going to choose, because you have to show effectiveness in order to build that critical mass. Right. So I think it's great. I don't think we're approaching it correctly necessarily. I think there's some bad advisement going on, because unless you've done it, you just don't know which corners to look around. Right. But I'm hoping we catch up very quickly. In 2 to 3 years, everyone will have an aha moment and saying, We had FOMO, but I'm glad we didn't rush into it.
Yeah, I think FOMO is the big thing, right?
Yeah.
That's why there are hyped expectations. And to your point, whether it is our consulting partners or just everybody enthusiastic because it's available. I can go and create my own, craft my communication and say, refine this ChatGPT. It's doing that. My son's writing his college essays, first write it and then go and, so they think it's easy to do really the search summarization even within the business against the business data. An application will come out with, take a content, copy paste it, and voila, you got it.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge with the expectations. Democratization is good, but I still see that the classical AI or what's machine learning, not 15 years the way that Equifax wanted, but I mean that was something that machine learning, the classic machine learning, is something that which continues to provide, whether it is better segmentations, propensities, and recommendations, and all of these really proven use cases and proven outcomes that you could at least touch and feel. I think that still continues to happen. I mean, thanks to generative AI, that it opened up and it made it a first-class citizen, but a data strategy and the data quality became a lot more important. Even though data quality was considered defensive strategy, none of us wanted to talk about it, even though we know that's a problem, but we never went and talked about it. In the recent 5 years, when everybody's the CDO role become more of a senior leadership role, I think still the data strategy, just the availability of the data, and continued regulations that which will limit what you can do. I think these continues to be biggest challenges, while there are opportunities and more use cases to go with generative AI.
Yeah.
So when we talk about data strategy, one thing that hasn't really come up as much as I might expect is, alongside strategy is certainly operating model and organizational design. And operating model is absolutely key. But I think generative AI has actually added fuel to a really hot question that chief data and analytics officers face, is how federated should data science be? Where should data science be allowed to happen? And certainly with data science, there are pretty massive risks. Dave, you spoke about, certainly in terms of intellectual property and being ethical in terms of its use, in terms of protection against bias, protection against hallucinations. All of this is becoming exacerbated. And if I look at the evolution of the chief data role, I project there's going to be more and more emphasis, again, on the control side of the equation. And I see this beginning to emerge.
Yeah.
And it's going to be absolutely fundamental. But how do we, the cat's been let out of the bag. How do you all figure out how to put the right controls in place when these APIs are so accessible to laymen? And it is so tempting, and people are operating from a place of ignorance, not understanding the risk.
Linda, are you officially retiring, by the way?
Sorry?
You just pushed it on everyone else. Are you officially retiring? We don't
You
know
will
yet?
know. I'm not sure if I want to do this gig again.
I hear you.
I mean, I think
Maybe
Raj,
I'll add a couple things. I think there is a huge potential, but identifying the business cases where you can really drive value. You don't want to stop at POC level, right? I think we need to mature the models to the next level. So identifying that business value is key. And I think we need to identify where the risk is low, right? Whether is it an acceptable risk for the organization to implement that model in a space you want to be. Maybe if it is a document authoring, if you put human in the middle, very less risk, right? So having a data strategy where you identify the quality of the data, the risk associated with it, how you can mitigate that risk, and what value it will generate.
And you're moving into operating model here, right?
Yeah.
See, I struggle with business value, 1,000%. Because what's business value to the head of supply chain is not business value to the head of R&D.
Based on the business case, it's different.
Business value to the head of finance, and it's not business value to the head of HR. It's not business value to the president that's running a brand. There's conflicting views of what they consider is important to them, because if you're running a P&L, it's 100% growth-based. What are you going to do to contribute to my top line? They're not even as concerned with margin and productivity just yet. They're just always complaining about why things take too long. So their agenda is very different. And then you've got the functional leaders like supply chain and R&D and finance and HR. They're struggling to do their thing because we're all service-based functions and we're meant to support the business's growth as fast as possible. So I struggle with business value because, you know, I can communicate and I can schmooze the room and I can somewhat get agreement,
Right.
but to prioritize your use cases, whether they're generative AI, applied AI, basic data ecosystem, purely on business value, I've never been able to successfully, in my opinion, do it, even though I've got my priorities. So for me, I've always thrown in criticality of the organization,
Right.
whether there's a disruption or a threat or growth or the focus happens to be on margin gains, but complexity to deploy.
Yeah.
And like I map it out on a quadrant and I'm like, this is really cool. We have no chance in hell of actually accomplishing it based on the way we are structured today and our maturity.
Yeah.
So maybe we should not bite more than we can chew.
Right.
And I know every consulting talk, everything on LinkedIn is business value, business value. I'm
Yeah.
like,
That's
that's
business value.
personally tripped me up so much
I-
because you can't be a negotiator and a mediator between everyone else's agenda.
Absolutely.
I think that something keeps me awake. Business value.
I think all of us do, right?
Yeah.
I think that the only way you can do it is the point you made it before, productivity, right? How either this business case is going to improve productivity or is it going to reduce the regulatory risk? I think you cannot get exact maybe dollar value, but you can negotiate
Right.
with the business, saying that what they perceive it as a value coming out of the use case.
I think there's a bit of an attribution that the way that the chief marketing officers say, how are they saying that the sales have increased because of marketing? How are they proving it? I think we have to probably have few things to learn from how marketing attribution. I know they haven't mastered yet. I know there was a professor here about marketing, but they haven't mastered yet. But I think there is at least an attribution or a connecting the dots to see that you had this top line growth. In order to do that, you did this product or a service or offering in a different way, and that resulted in through these actions. And here is where the foundationally, I know business value directly talking about that we made you $25 million. They'll just laugh us out of the room. But there is an attribution. I think that's where I continue to say this is why the tenure. I know, Randy, you love to write about why the tenure of the chief data officers is very low. I see that because I think when we go into the roles, we're all talking about what's possible. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a lot possible with a great foundation and a wonderful use cases around that getting applied. You have your data ecosystem and data possible and connected. Of course, there is the world of possibilities are there, but the challenge is to challenge is to pick the use cases where you're performing while transforming. I think that's what I think we all miss, and including myself. I think I'm facing that heat right now from my leadership about you've been taking longer on transformation. Yes, you're doing some things for business to do, but the question is they're not understood. They're not aligned. Not everybody's aligned. Mm-hmm. And alignment is, again, continues to be a challenge for this C-suite role than any other roles, that you have to continuously align, continuously tell why it's important, even though this is a water that nobody can live without. I think those are different challenges.
By the way, what's the new stat for average tenureship of CDOs now?
Well, a couple of years ago, we said it was 2 to 2.5 years, but it seems to be like.
I heard it was 18 months recently.
I think 18 months is about right.
My goodness.
I know somebody who was appointed chief data officer a year ago at this time, and then in April, I got the call that they were departing the job, so that was a 6 month.
Yeah, Randy, I want to probably put a positive spin, though. Again, please, if you're aspiring chief data officers or you're in the role already for a period of time, please do not start counting how many months or how many quarters are left. I think honestly, I think generative AI provides the opportunity and a fuel, but the question will be about managing those expectations.
So a question following up on that, and I think this is a great discussion because it's a real world discussion. In other words, 5 or 6 years ago, when you used to do CDO panels, people said, we got to build the data mart and we got to create a data mesh and a data fabric. And it was like, business people don't understand that. So this is a great conversation. But one of the questions that was asked was, is generative AI part of the CDO role? And 61% said yes. And then the second question was, generative AI, should it be part of the CDO role? And 80% said yes. Well, you know, do you have a viewpoint on that?
I have a few. I've pushed a few things to production. You can't do it on your own for a few reasons. One, your compliance and risk team is always involved. So whoever's heading your compliance, like they are a part of that team. You need their blessing before anything gets pushed. Two, you need the support of the CIO because you have a fundamental need and dependency on infrastructure. The biggest gotcha in all of this is there hasn't been enough companies who've pushed things to production yet, so they're not aware of what they're not aware of. When you're developing a software and you're creating code for a feature, when you're ready to push that into production, you containerize that code, you push it into production, now that button shows up and it's purple. That code can live in a static state because you need that button to exist on that website or on that app, and it's going to function as is. The challenge is with pushing, and this is why MLOps came, and we haven't even mastered MLOps, not at companies of our scale. But when you're pushing anything that's machine learning oriented into production, or things like generative AI into production, the problem is you're only as good as your last data set, period. Well, if you're expected to continually stay up to date, things like recommendations engines, personalization, well, if you're going to personalize, it's based on that person's last step, like that CTA, right? What they did last. So you're only as good as the last data set, which by default creates this fluid and dynamic environment. You've got to continuously stream new data into production. That requires GPUs, CPUs, workloads, an extremely experienced DevOps team that knows how to manage that dynamic environment. With all due respect, I don't want to manage that. That's not the cool stuff for me. That's just not the fun stuff. In my prior roles, I do love building business-facing products and capabilities. I don't want to be a DevOps expert. I know databases. I don't want to be a database administrator. So in the role of this new generative AI trend that's kicking in, I do think it's a shared responsibility because no one's going to want to manage those pipelines. I don't want to watch Datadog and Jenkins all day long to make sure that my data feeds haven't crashed and that whatever I'm producing for something that could be external facing is inaccurate. But right now we're in perpetual POC purgatory. Everything's in POC. Not enough companies of our scale have pushed enough things to production. They're not familiar with the gotchas, but once they are, they realize that it is a Navy SEALs team. We are in this hell and misery and fun endeavor together, and I do think it's a combination of risk and compliance, the CIO, the CDO, whatever use case supports, if it's a function or a business, those stakeholders have to be involved because you kind of need to know the whoopsies along the way. And then the decision-making of turning the faucet on and pushing it into production and making the commitment with the infrastructure costs has to be a unanimous decision, and one person can't hold all of that.
Agreed.
So I want to build on what you were saying here about it takes a village, because I think one of the big areas that you have to win over as a chief data officer certainly is the middle management on the business side as well.
Yeah.
Because that's where the ideas are going to come from.
Yeah.
That's where the buy-in is going to come from. That's where the connections are going to come from. So it's wonderful if you have the CIO buy-in. It's wonderful if you have the C-suite buy-in more generally. But it's middle management that actually makes things happen. And I found that, at Verizon, for, whatever the number is, we actually drove, in the second year of my team's existence, what added up to $2 billion worth of value across Verizon. And that came out of a whole slew of little use cases that we actually pushed across the line. Now, I'm going to go back and say, well, that those numbers were very controversial, but they were actually methodologies that their own transformation offices had come up with.
Yeah.
But they were not popular numbers. They were not popular numbers because what that did was basically say, okay, we saved you X amount in operations. Why isn't that hitting your bottom line? We made you more successful in marketing. Why aren't we seeing that actually in your numbers as well? It created accountability with the business.
Yeah.
It does. I can't think of a right way to do this.
That's
because
true.
if you don't show the business value, you're going to be out the door. You're not worth anything. If you do show the business value, you become a controversial figure. So it's kind of a difficult place to say, but I want to get back to my point. This is all about it takes a village. And the village isn't just even the use case. I remember we had basically built models to optimize how we scheduled the 32,000 customer service agents of Verizon. Not an easy matter. And what we hadn't taken into account fully was the impact of marketing campaigns. So you have to keep going upstream if you want to be successful here. So it takes a very, very complicated village to be successful here.
And if you guys don't know who Linda is, by the way, she did a phenomenal job at Verizon. Talk to her about some of the stuff that she pushed over the line. It was pushing multiple boulders up a hill.
Thank you, Saul.
So kudos, Linda.
Does anybody else want to take this or next question?
If I can add one thing on there.
Yeah, just a quick one. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All the knowledge that is required to push an ML, the generative AI into production, it doesn't exist in one group, right? You need legal, ethics, privacy. You need, as Sol said, like a lot of technology pieces to it. So I think until it's matured, it's better to have it as a joint responsibility. Because you don't want to be getting into the risks of legal and privacy and ethics. So I think that it's better to have it as a joint.
Right, I agree, but I think we are probably hedging that too much. I think data officers definitely have a significant part of the responsibility for AI, whether it's generative AI, classical AI, machine learning, I see that. But at the same time, just the way that for other channels, if you look at digital, there is somebody who is in charge of the digital business, introducing the business and the experiences versus the technology side of it versus the value generation side. And of course, even digital has the same privacy and the risk and security which need to be. I think this is going to be, some of these foundational roles will exist, but I see that data officers will still play a significant role along with the business leader who is monetizing this. That monetization is not necessarily data officers' role.
So Randy, I think you have a self-driving autonomous panel here. You're having a hard time steering us. We're just going where we want.
Isn't that what the future is, Linda?
Yes.
So in our remaining time, maybe we could talk a little bit about what the future holds. I'd say that it's interesting that most of the chief data officers I know that have left their jobs this year have not gone back into chief data officer roles by choice. One of the more interesting conversations was, many of you may know of Joanne Stonier from MasterCard. Mm-hmm. And she gave me a call in May, and she said, "You're doing this new thing called an Innovation Fellow now." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, I do a lot of writing, speaking, doing events, but I have no operational responsibility." And she goes, "Interesting." And then a month later, I see the announcement, Joanne Stonier, no longer Chief Data Officer, but basically Innovation Fellow for MasterCard for data and AI. So, you know, as you think about where you can make an impact and have influence in a meaningful fashion, is it as a Chief Data Officer narrowly defined, or do you need to spread your wings more widely?
Personally, at this point, I'm looking to spread my wings more widely. I've enjoyed working with private equity portfolio companies in advisory capacities. I'm actually starting up a company that is going to be providing tabletop exercises similar to what CISOs do, except in the chief data officer space. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that was so striking to me is how much change came out of a tabletop exercise that was run at Verizon around ransomware. I think this is an opportunity to emotionally connect with senior leadership. That's what a tabletop does, different than presentations, deckware. So I see a lot of opportunity here. I want to focus on educating the C-suite. I want to focus on educating boards. I want to be out there helping chief data officers be successful.
Right.
And that's really the direction I want to be taking things.
I think that's a great point. I think as being somebody who is a CDO and data leader for a long time, there is a cred comes with that. Credibility comes with that. I think this is the time. If I would get that opportunity, I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to go play that advisory role for some time, to go across. So that way you're seeing from the other side, and you're able to now provide.
It's called a 2-week notice. You can easily do it.
Again, you're right that the next
It's a
gig,
choice.
I think next gig, I mean, there is a need for that one. I think not only just bringing it back to one person, but I think the industry needs it. Again, with all due respect to a lot of our consulting partners, a lot of them have very good at reading, understanding, and then interpreting it. But they don't necessarily have the battle wounds that all of us who did that role. I think some of the people who have done this role and have gone through this over the many years, both the politics side of it and running the data environments to justifying this aligning again, I think that's important. That's an important capability. That's an important point of view and perspective to keep moving this industry along and make the power of data and power of insights better understood.
And I'd love to hear from Raj, because Raj was on a similar panel that did at a competitive university, MIT, in July, and she was the newest into the role, so she was also the less jaded, the less beat up, the more optimistic.
You can tell she's still smiling.
So it's 3 months, 4 months later now, 6 months maybe. So what's your view, Raj?
I think still there is a burnout. It's a lot of expectations. Because there is a lot to do. The data is exploding tenfold compared to a few years ago. So the expectations and the pressure is more. So what you want to deliver, and you need to look at the quick wins, and also at the same time you need to plan for your long-term vision. So a lot of pressure, burnout teams, burnout. So how do you manage all these expectations? On top of it, educating your senior leadership, right? CXO level to all the way to bottom. Like change. I think the cultural transformation is another big burden on CDO roles. Still, I'm motivated. I still up for the challenge. I'm positive that Linda and Sol and more innovation fellows like you are going to mentor us and inspire us to continue a little longer.
and I think you'd shared it as well in July that at Sanofi there actually was somebody appointed to the enterprise chief data officer, but they were gone. Yeah. But you were more like embedded, and you were there. So it's interesting that that the person that was in the enterprise role wasn't successful.
I think the functional CDOs are more.
Pharma is a different beast because you've got commercial, R&D, and manufacturing, and they essentially operate as three businesses with three completely different revenue models. So that wasn't the right setup to begin with.
I think, Randy, it's probably unfair to say that the enterprise chief data officer is not successful. It's the misalignment of expectations between what the C-suite or the board thought and the role is about. I think again, as I said, I've gone through both great support to wonderful funding to still get funding, but also expectations about why is that not got done, even though we decided as a business, as a leadership team of the company, that that's not a priority. I think especially I know that's a challenge in every C-suite role, but it's more prominent because data officers don't own anything which is directly touching the customer. I think that's what makes it that if anything were to happen, it ultimately comes back, I think, whatever rolls down the hill. So that's, I'm not going to use the word, but I think that's the expectation management, expectation and misalignment between the expectations of what has that role have been established for, and there is a short-term memory around that. And then a year later, it's been seen, why have you not done and changed the world, or even not even change the world. World peace and world hunger, why is that not solved by the enterprise chief data officer within a year?
And Saul, want to give you the last word, the diversity of your experience, Estee Lauder, Royal Caribbean, Merck, and Sony Music. And the last article I published in Forbes last week was actually about Universal Music and how they were using data and analytics. But the interesting thing, I don't know if you know Naris Ichambody, but he wanted to talk about AI, and it was forbidden. In other words, the corporate communication said there could be absolutely no mention of AI in an article about Universal Music because of all of the copyright and other issues.
I know him well, and I went through those discussions in 2018 and 19. The beauty of that industry is they can't tell the difference between what is AI and what's not AI. I remember before we had all the bells and whistles, like just as a tangential use case, New Music Fridays in the music industry is big. It's when artists release new tracks, it's when your playlists are updated, and usually the top 50 slots get the most amount of streams. So we created a product where it was a mobile app for all the music executives. So instead of them getting emails or constantly asking people what they were doing or doing this with their Excels or PDFs, it was an app. We literally had to go to their executive assistants, download it, teach them so they could teach them for 3-4 minutes. And what it would do is at any point in time, they can look at any one of their rosters, and it was a global view, and it would send push notifications if things were going above a certain threshold. Really cool, got a lot of attention. But we were already embedding AI-ish capabilities like social sentiment. And the thing that was interesting there is they didn't know it was happening, but we had to go through the 4 months of figuring out the urban dictionary and the music dictionary. I don't know if you guys know this, but that track, David, can I cuss for a second? Okay. That track is shit versus that track is the shit versus that track is the shit. All different connotations between positive and negative. And we had to translate that. Or country music is a genre. They love emojis. Sad face doesn't mean a song sucks. Sad face in country music means empathy and relation. So it's actually a positive sentiment. Mm-hmm. The consumer is relating to the track that you just released. Now they talk about AI being a bad thing, data being a bad thing, but they are fundamentally reliant on it to understand how an artist is performing globally, within markets, within regions, what tracks, placements. The key to his success, and we chat about this all the time, is I'm like, just do it, don't tell them because they won't know the difference anyway. But the biggest thing is content creation for the music industry. Yeah. They have built an industry that is very proud and very honored to have the crazy thinkers of what we should do with the video and how we should film and produce, and it's unbelievable what goes into it, but that's why a simple music, like a video production, costs them $3.5 million, and that's like a low budget. That's a space that you don't touch. So you learn the boundaries of what you can stretch and what you can't stretch. You just can't say it, so you're not going to get any PR around it. But Warner Music, as an opposite, I don't know if you guys remember this, but in 2019, they actually produced the first AI-based track. And there was huge riff from Sony Music and Universal Music because they're like, what are you doing? You are setting the precedence for something that we have been trying to contain because our songwriters, our music producers, our sound engineers, our artists are the ones that create a track. And here you go scanning Billboard's top 100s for the past 10 years and find the RPM, the tune, the melody, and you create an AI manufactured track that's doing really well. You're negating our entire 20, 30 plus years. Like, as if Napster wasn't enough, as if Spotify and Apple was enough, you're introducing this. Warner never published anything after that. So they're those three labels coming together to set up the rules of engagement for entertainment and media. It's a tight niche thing. So it's happening. You just can't say it is.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful panelists. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, your real-world perspectives, your view of the future. Thank you, Northeastern University, and thank you, Dave Matheson. Delighted to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Randy, thank you.
Great job.